Hello and welcome to Let's H. I'm Hushjol, your host. Scroll down and click on the read more in the blurb, follow the links and become a patron on Patreon to support quality content. Today we are back with another episode of Angel Season 5. This episode, Origin. This is the 18th episode of Season 5 and it follows right in the footsteps of the previous episode, Underneath. To get it out of the way, Gunn is still in the Hell Dimension. This is kind of a recurring motif with Season 5. They have these, I don't want to call them long-running plots, but they have these stories where they keep them going for a while, usually about 1 or 2 episodes, longer than they strictly need to. By which I mean, they keep them going for a couple of episodes when they could have just easily tied them up in the next episode, since that's pretty much what they always do. They tie them up in the next episode, and it's done. The way that they tie it up kind of also calls to question why they even bother to draw it out so long in the first place. Like recorporealizing Spike, for example. It was insultingly quick and casual. So basically Gunn might as well not be in this one, and similarly Spike might as well not be in this one either. It's just another episode to try and make him look like the butt of a joke, when his fighting skills are supposed to be absolutely superb. It's just not funny. Yeah, we know Angel has a problem with Spike and blah blah blah, but it just makes Angel look worse to constantly be doing what he's doing, and doing this stuff not because he thinks it's a good idea or that it will lead to good things for the rest of them, which he looks like a giant asshole basically asserting at the beginning of the episode, but it makes him just seem like a petty childish ass, putting Spike into danger, potentially mortal danger because they don't know what Lyria can do, and being absolutely obnoxious to Wes, which, yeah, that one I can kind of understand, because Wes is really obnoxious. It's very sad during this episode, because you can tell this is an episode that is supposed to be very meaningful to the character, but that's one of my biggest problems with this episode. It doesn't seem to actually mean anything to Wes. This could be because he is terrible at acting this season, or it could be because, well, it's not written very well to include Wes. We just don't care. We're not made to care by anything that happens. Wes almost seems like the B-plot, or really the C-plot. He barely factors into it. Illyria is much more interesting, as usual, and honestly, she's basically just in it to move the plot along herself. That really gets at the heart of the inherent problem underneath everything in Origin. It's too much plot to deal with in one episode. It seems like they stretch out things that don't really have enough plot into 2 episodes, or they keep dwelling on shit that we don't care about for way too long, or they try and extend a plot much longer than it needs to be and then tie it up in an insultingly brief way. Why do they keep doing this? There was way more going on then you can really fit comfortably into one episode. But things being what they are, and Wes absolutely refusing to emote in this season, I suppose it's good that they didn't dwell on it. This should have been an episode where things really changed. But instead it just brings up a lot more questions about, well, if they reality shifted, then couldn't they just shift reality again? Why couldn't they? Why doesn't the Orlan window change things in any meaningful way? Why does it just restore people's memories? What do you need to do to shift reality back to what it was? Is there anything you can do? Why bring it up if you're not going to deal with it? Like, why even touch upon the issue if you're not going to talk about it in any length? If you have someone like Wes bringing up the issue, and you have someone like Illyria talking about the issue, don't just drop the issue. This is as frustrating as, should we really be at Wolfram and Hart, that they continued for the first half of the season. Except in this case, they're never actually going to address it. It's the elephant in the room for the rest of the season. And to boot, nothing changes. They get their memories back, and nothing changes. Things should have changed considerably. And yeah, it's probably Wes's refusal to emote again, but he shouldn't have even been like that. The way he should have been at the start of Season 5 ought to have been closer to the way he was at the beginning of Season 3. Instead, he's just nothing. He's basically the same emotionless cipher that was there in Season 4 when he bothered to be there. It's a real sign that the character has nothing to do and has really played out his course, when even a story that should have had such a huge impact on him doesn't actually end up affecting him much. In fact, he seems more bummed out at the fact that breaking the Orlan window didn't change anything effectively than he is getting his memories back and knowing that he can probably never trust Angel again. And really, why is he still with Angel? Angel did a lot of stupid crap, And one of the most stupid things that he did is something that everybody will now know. He fucked with their memories. He basically let other people mind rape them, which may have affected their judgment capabilities in working with Wolfram and Hart. That is not okay. Real, logical, reasonable, rational people who have that memory returned to them would have walked out so fast his head would spin around and vomit pea soup. There is absolutely no realistic explanation as to why they stay around, but especially not why Wes does. And furthermore, especially with how dangerous Wolfram and Hart is, and they know it's that way. They're losing people. Gunn's predicament alone should tell Wes now is the time to get the fuck out. It's not like they could actually stop Illyria. All he'd have to do would be to somehow convince her to leave, and he's gone. Why stay? This is the kind of episode that makes you sort of think it didn't really make sense past a point for them to even stay there. Regardless of what they try and do later, in what is basically the biggest retcon in the series, it wouldn't have actually changed much if they had left before Angel decided to implement his ridiculously stupid plan. All it did, actually, was make everybody question him, and then go along with him anyway, despite everything, and then he fucked even that up. It's just a very bad episode for Angel, and it should be a good episode for him, as well as a bad episode for Wes, and it should be a good episode for him. What's possibly the worst part of it, or maybe the best part of it, is the fact that Cyrus Vale is an interesting villain, and Vincent Kartheiser is a good actor. Connor is a character that I have never liked, and to be quite honest, it was a neat concept, but it was never done well. Connor, in his own way, really marked when the series kind of jumped the shark, because everything started to change, and not in a good way. When Connor came round in Season 3, we'll be honest, the show had had some real stinkers of episodes, like that Billy episode, but I absolutely refuse to talk any more about that. That was just like the nadir of the show, up to that point. But then they decided to try and tie in things in season-long arcs, which doesn't really work very well with Angel. The second season was so good because while they had some umbrella storylines that unified a number of episodes, they didn't have a singular arc that united everything. Season 3, they really tried to make all of it revolve around Connor, past the first few episodes, which seemed to just be more developing the characters, which was good, aside from that one episode. Once Season 3 tried to write its story, it got really bad and very chaotic. So many characters were thrown under the bus, and so many people did things that didn't even make sense, like Cordelia suddenly goes on vacation for no reason, and just to keep her out of the story while something major happens. That's insulting. She actually has a lot of development in Season 3, and some of it's really good stuff. I could do without the ridiculous romantic interest in Angel from time to time, depending on who's writing it, but at least it was something that made some sense because they were both very close, and they went way back, and of all the characters present at that time, they were the two that had been there the longest, and had the most history. With Cordelia developing more powers and becoming more of a higher being, that was actually a fairly interesting element for her character and for Angel to play off of. That said, if you've listened to my American Horror Story reviews, you know that I really don't like straight people baby daddy drama. I just don't care for it. I don't care for kids, not fond of pregnancy, don't want them in my entertainment. It happens, but honestly, if you get to that point, it's usually out of desperation. I do not particularly want to see any character that I like have to go through any of that. And usually, let's be honest, when a character becomes a parent, and frequently when people we know become parents, they become a lot less sympathetic. Whether they fawn over the kid and use them as an excuse for everything, or whether they're a terrible parent and neglectful and aren't there for their child, you're gonna do something really wrong with the character, sooner or later. It's going to lead to a lot of resentment and criticism, because one thing most of us have in common is, most of us had parents. And whether they were there or absent, we have feelings about that. When you're dealing with a show that's kind of as inconsistent in quality as Angel could be, you know the writers are sooner or later going to mess that up, and it's going to end up that he's going to do something stupid. It's going to make people feel uncomfortable, and it's going to make it much more difficult to sympathize with that character. It's one thing if it's a side character, or one of several characters that has a strong presence. But in Angel, the show is named after him. It's about him. Nobody is going to have as prominent a presence as he does. And when the show is taking a direction to make the titular character into Daddy Dearest, that takes a lot more finesse than the writing staff of Angel were able to provide. Connor also was not that great a character. The acting was good. Vincent Kartheiser, as I said, is a great actor. He's really good, and he feels natural whenever he does anything. He also has this kind of hilariously baby face. And I know the actor is older than he looks in a lot of the shots, but the way that they made him up and the way that they shot him makes him look like he's this tiny lava child. It's actually kind of funny because there are scenes where they didn't make him up quite so painstakingly, and you can see like the stubble, you can see his 5 o'clock shadow, you can see that he's older than he's supposed to be. But it's also kind of funny because of the role he's supposed to be playing. Season 4, as you know, is absolutely the low point of the series as a whole. I may criticize singular episodes up to that point, and Season 3 was not a good season, but it had its moments of being good. Season 4 was like reality shifted there too. And what am I watching? Did I accidentally lick a postage stamp that I shouldn't have? Maybe I went to a Grateful Dead concert that I didn't mean to go to or something. I don't know. Whatever happened, watching Season 4 is like getting food poisoning so badly that you're hallucinating and you think it's something that you know, but it's really not something you know. Am I getting too weird? I had really bad food poisoning one time and hallucinated for like a day. It was pretty horrifying. The thing I'm trying to get at, and I know it's too late for long story short, is why bring back Connor at all? One of the big reasons why they kind of got rid of him and essentially erased him from existence was because the storyline around him sucked. Nobody liked it. Everybody was jumping ship at the time. Even some of the stars in the show had expressed a distaste for where the story was going and how their characters were being treated. It's one of the reasons why Cordelia was put in a coma in Season 4, because they didn't know if the actress would be coming back. In fact, they lost a good handful of actors between Season 4 and 5 simply because the actors just didn't like where it was going and the viewing figures were not there. Why bring back the character of Connor that literally nobody was asking for? Were you that desperate? I don't think the criticisms of Season 5 were quite that harsh. As bizarre as some of the choices were and as terrible as some of the episodes were, it wasn't as bad as Season 4, and it certainly wasn't as surreal an experience as watching Season 4. But why bring Connor back? Why undo literally everything that motivated this entire season's storyline? The one thing that united them was working at Wolfram and Hart. Why take that and in one episode throw it out the window? And Connor was fucking psychotic the last time we saw him. How does that suddenly get resolved in him being able to pretend and figuring out how to finally say goodbye to his father? It made it sort of a nice wrap-up, but at the same time, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have even brought it up or touched upon it. And that said, the story with Connor is actually fairly gripping. But Angel's motivations for getting there, Angel's motivations for doing all these things, are called into question, because he's a giant asshole most of this season, especially now, and he's a giant asshole in this episode too. And it's hard to feel any sympathy for him because literally every problem that he has in this episode and in this season pertaining to Connor, he has created. All of these things are his fault. It is impossible to feel bad for Angel because he has literally failed to tell people what they need to know. And then they do things out of ignorance because he keeps them in the dark all the time and doesn't trust them enough. That's dumb. You are making your own problems. And while that can lead to good storytelling, it doesn't in this case because it's impossible to feel sympathy for the person that we're supposed to feel the most sympathy for. All of this said, I feel like this would have been better as bringing Cordelia back for this episode. If we had only got this same care for the character in You're Welcome, I would be talking about a completely different show. If we had had Cordelia come back in this episode and basically play the role that Connor does, that would be cool. That would have been something interesting that would have contributed to the character, the overall season, and brought it into what they eventually found the story to be for the season. They hadn't really determined that at the time that they did the You're Welcome episode. They didn't have any idea where they were going with the season, which is why they only later retconned in something to do with the end of the season from that episode. So there's a bit of sour grapes, I suppose, here. Connor, the character, does not deserve such a solid send-off. In fact, he shouldn't have been brought back to begin with. And yeah, all the other problems aside, this is a fairly solid send-off for the character. You can ignore Wes, well, pretty much most of the time in Season 5, and the rest of the B and C plots, nobody really cares. We're gonna deal with those later, and that's fine. It's not that much different from the rest of the season. If it's not going to get dealt with, well, it's not going to get dealt with. That's kind of par for the course for the rest of the season too. But if you concentrate on Connor and his storyline, it's actually pretty interesting. Sejan, for example, though well acted, was another example of characters in Season 3 who were dealt with in extremely unfulfilling ways. Holtz, you might remember from that season, was randomly offed by Justine, I think her name was, and Sejan was also taken care of by Justine. Justine? Really? She was terrible, and she only got worse because she kept taking the glory from the real main characters. It's remarkable that she managed to survive after that, and even though she got tortured by Wes, it wasn't enough. She was a horrible fucking character that basically ruined the entire story. We didn't even get the slightest satisfaction or fulfillment from that season because she kept fucking up the final confrontations with the end bosses, basically. So it was nice to get some resolution at least. Though it did kind of call attention back to all of the things that were done wrong before now, and most especially Angel's stupid plan to bring them to Wolfram and Hart. At this point, not much that he's done really looks that good. It's easy to criticize him, because it's episodes like this one that show how wrong he really was, and overall how stupid he was. It was a dumb decision. Also, unfortunately, we have to put up with Marcus a little bit in this episode, which just adds to the irritation a little bit more. So, even with all my bitching about this episode, it did do a fairly good job of resolving some things that were left hanging. Sejan, for example. Although I don't really like the fact that they brought back the character just to kill him off, he was a major villain that they handled very poorly. Bringing back Connor was not something I think anybody really wanted, but at least they seemed to deal with him with some finality in this episode. We'll find out later, of course, that that wasn't it, but hideous problematic finale will be dealt with later. If we just view this as itself, as a distinctive episode on its own, it's not bad. It's not great, mainly because they stuff too much into such a small running time and don't really adequately tell the whole story that they could tell. But frankly, if they had stretched it out, it probably would take too long. Wes isn't up for not emoting through something that should be a life-changing moment. Angel's enough of an asshole in most of the episode anyway, and, well, we don't really want more of that either. He's getting worse as the episodes go on, which again is handled by more retcon. But on its own, I have to say that this episode was actually pretty interesting if you concentrate on Connor's plot and see the potential in the character that is sort of appreciated by someone that clearly cares for the character. It just seems like a poor idea to bring back one of the things that commonly is regarded as the cause for the show jumping the shark. Connor was never written particularly well before now. The fact that he's written well as a supporting character in an episode after he was basically wiped from existence doesn't really change anything and only reminds us of how bad the show got before now. Pretty much nobody wanted to see Connor again. The character had potential, but it was never reached. The actor was a good actor, and it's remarkable that they could get him for this episode, but frankly he should never have come back. And when I watch this episode, I have to view it more harshly, if only because Cordelia's return should have been at least this solid, but it wasn't. Your Welcome was, overall, a terrible episode. Origin was far better than Connor deserved, far better than the story deserved that it was trying to tell. If we had only had that much attention given to Cordelia in the episode You're Welcome, and had more of a celebration of a character that came from the very beginning of the show, when the show was good, and one of the reasons why the show was still good after such a long, hard path, it might not have reminded us that her absence was one of the reasons why Season 5 didn't work very well. Why couldn't we have had an episode that was a celebration of everything good, the way the show used to be? Even the season was trying to be more like earlier seasons in a number of ways, because it would have little stories, and it would have individual episodes that stood alone, basically. But it was clearly not building towards anything in the beginning. It only started to do that more than halfway through the season, which ultimately resulted in a very poor story being told. and an extremely unsatisfying ending to what had been an incredibly uneven final year. Origin overall is probably worth including in your watch through of Season 5, but if you've seen the previous seasons and you share the feelings about Connor, you may not want to watch it. If you haven't, or if you want to hope for the potential of the character, this is actually a really good episode for him. You will have to deal with some bullshittery from Wes and some what the hell is this, why didn't we deal with any of this from the episode. But Connor's story is at least good in this. You just have to kind of not think about the rest that they failed to do, as they consistently and repeatedly fail to deal with realistic repercussions from memories being erased and hidden. There's not much thought given to it, as I've covered in previous episodes, so I won't go on with that much longer here, and as a result, it all seems very shoddy. There's something to be had in this episode, there's enjoyment there, but more than that, it leaves me with a sense of disappointment that not only was a character brought back that didn't deserve it and given a much more respectful send-off than a better and more beloved character, but also that really the rest of the story is not dealt with well at all, so it's a bit mixed. Include it tentatively, but if you're not getting into it, just turn it off and skip to the next episode. You don't essentially miss anything. I'll see you back here next time for another episode. You're welcome. Bye.